They say that heroes are ordinary people who make themselves extraordinary. In this video, I'm going to share the story of my childhood and hero journey, and more importantly, the truth that I discovered about trying to be a hero. I grew up the youngest of 4 boys being raised by a single mother. My brothers were each born 1 year apart, then I showed up 7 years later. As you can imagine, my brothers were fairly close to each other, but that age gap placed me squarely on the outside. My mother worked hard to provide for us, and as a little boy in such an environment, I wanted nothing more than to feel loved. To fill my time, I watched a lot of television, and in the 60s and 70s, TV was quite different than it is today. Back then, all the action shows were cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, good guys versus bad guys. And the good guys won, every time. Every show that I watched had a damsel in distress and a hero. The hero was the guy who swooped in and saved the day. Think about that for a minute. A 7-year-old boy who, right or wrong, craving what he believes to be love, being bombarded with the message that the hero always gets the girl. Is it any wonder I concluded that I had to become a hero? And becoming a hero meant that I had to be rich enough and powerful enough to protect and provide for my damsel in distress, whatever she may desire. For a long time, that was my identity. I started flying at 14. I started my first entrepreneurial venture at 16, and I joined the Air Force at 19. I was generous with my money, and I freely gave my time to anyone in need. And I displayed a lifestyle that was desirable to women and envious to my peers. For a while, it seemed to be working. But here's what I eventually found out. Everyone doesn't love a hero. Everyone loves what they can get from a hero. And that difference slowly, silently wore on me for decades. In the English language, we have a single word for love. But in the Greek, there are 3 separate words for love. 3 distinct words to describe 3 types of caring for others. The first is eros. Eros is romantic love. That's the love between a husband and a wife. The second word is philios, brotherly love, the kind of love between 2 people who have many things in common, what today we might call BFFs. Then there's agape. Agape is a love that's based upon who the person is rather than what they can provide. This is the unshakable, godly type of love, the type of love God has for his children. I had spent my entire life chasing the wrong kind of love. I was earning gratitude and calling it love. Now here's where it gets bigger than me. When a man places himself in the role of sole provider and protector, the one who handles everything, the one who everyone else can count on, he's not just exhausting himself, he's attempting to do the impossible. He's trying to be the God of his family. And this desire to be like God is at the heart of many of the world's problems today. So if a man's greatest need is to feel loved for who he is rather than what he provides, why does he continue to build his identity around providing? I think the answer goes all the way back to the garden, because Adam did the exact same thing, just in a slightly different way. The man's job in the garden was to tend and keep it, everything in it, including the woman God gave to be with him. Genesis 3 tells us that the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field that God had made. It also tells us that the serpent approached Eve, not Adam. The implication here is that the adversary goes after the emotional side of man as opposed to the logical side. And it tells us something else too, almost in passing, that when the woman ate the fruit, she gave some also to her husband who was with her, and he ate too. Now, I don't know if Adam was with Eve during the entire conversation with the serpent, but what I can surmise is this. Before she ate the fruit, Adam had the opportunity to stop her, or at the very least, he had the opportunity to refuse to eat it himself. I think the uncomfortable truth is this. Adam wanted the same thing that Eve wanted, and he let her go first. You see, if she ate the fruit and nothing happened, he could get the benefit without any of the risk. If she took it and things went bad, he could say, hey, I never touched it. Either way, his hands stayed clean. Adam wanted to have his cake and eat it too. Then God showed up and asked a question that Adam just couldn't deny. Who told you you were naked? In other words, I already know what you did, so don't try to lie. God immediately followed that up with, did you eat of the tree that I commanded you not to eat of? At this point, Adam's entire cake collapsed. Adam didn't say, I failed to protect my wife. He didn't even say, yes, God, I ate of the tree. He said, the woman you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit and I ate of it. Adam's first move wasn't to take responsibility. It was to blame God. Here's where it gets even harder to hear. The Bible tells us in 1 Timothy that Adam was not deceived. Eve was deceived. The serpent twisted the truth and played on her desire to be like God. But Adam knew exactly what God said. There was no doubt in his mind about the command, and there was no confusion about what he was holding in his hand. He knew, and he ate anyway. So if it wasn't deception, what was it that led Adam to disobey God's command? I think Adam was standing at a fork in the road, and both directions required him to make a sacrifice. On one side was God's clear instruction, and on the other side was his wife, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh, his damsel in distress. Adam had a chance right there to lead her back, to say, I know you want this, but God said something different, and I'm not going to follow you in this direction. That's what the steward's job actually required in the moment, not just protecting the garden from infiltration, but protecting his wife from her own desires, even if that meant disappointing her in the moment. Instead, he chose her desire over God's word. This is the sin that doesn't get talked about enough, because it doesn't look like rebellion. It looks like love. A man going along with his wife because he doesn't want to disappoint her. He doesn't want to be the one who says no. But following someone into something you know is wrong, that's not love. It's abdication. And many times, abdication results in more harm than good. By the time Adam actually took the fruit, the damage had already been done. He'd already failed to protect the garden. He'd already put his wife's desire ahead of God's command. Eating the fruit itself was almost an afterthought, a formality. The boundary had already been crossed in his will long before it was crossed by his hand. Let's take a moment to consider why this boundary was so important. You see, God told man that you may freely eat of every tree in the garden. Every tree. Freely eat. Does that sound like a great deal? Yes or yes? The only thing in the garden that was forbidden was the thing that belonged exclusively to God, the knowledge of good and evil. The serpent managed to get Eve to shift her attention from the abundance that was available to her to the one thing that she lacked. He said, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That was the temptation. Not power, she was already equal to Adam. Not pleasure, the garden already provided that. But the ability to know what God knows, to stop relying on him to define what's good and what's evil, and start deciding for herself. They ate, and their eyes were open, but not in the way the serpent had promised. They didn't become like God. They became aware of everything that they weren't, aware that they were vulnerable, aware for the first time that there was a world of hardship, struggle, and death out there. That's the real cost of trying to be like God. It's not that you fail to gain his power. It's that you finally discover how much you needed him in the first place. One act of disobedience, 3 sins. Failing to guard that which was entrusted to him, choosing comfort over obedience, and reaching for that which was never intended to be his. And every one of them came from the same place. A man trying to be something to the people that he loves that only God was supposed to be. So what does all this have to do with finances? Well, everything. Because the hero mindset doesn't just show up in relationships. It shows up every time a man feels like he has to be the one who knows everything about money, handles everything about money, and never lets anyone, including his wife, see the full picture. I lived this. For years, I carried the finances alone. Not because my wife wasn't capable, but because somewhere inside, that little 8-year-old who needed to be the hero was still running the show. Saying no felt like a betrayal, and asking for help seemed like admitting that I wasn't enough. Bringing her into the full picture felt like exposing a weakness I'd been hiding my entire life. Here's what I eventually understood. The man who insists on being the sole source of provision, protection, and financial wisdom for his family isn't being strong. He's doing exactly what Adam did. He's trying to occupy a seat that was never his. And he's exhausted for the same reason that Adam's entire strategy collapsed on him. The position was never sustainable because it was never real. The steward is not the hero's lesser version. The steward is something that the hero could never be. A man at peace. Because he's not trying to carry a cross that was never his to carry. And here's the part that changes everything. The hero was never intended to stand alone. God said it himself back in the garden before any of this went wrong. It is not good for man to be alone. Next week, we're going to go all the way back to the garden, before the fall, before the distortion, before the deception, to show you what God's original design for wealth and partnership actually looks like. You might be surprised at what was there all along. I'm Papa Charlie. Class dismissed.